Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Place. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe you've had a long day filled with the noise and rush of modern life, or perhaps you're simply the kind of person who finds comfort in stories that stretch across unimaginable spans of time, stories that remind us we're part of something ancient and beautiful. Either way, you're exactly where you need to be. Tonight, we're going to trace a path that winds back through millions of years, through forests that no longer exist, across savannas where the grass whispered different secrets, and into caves lit by fires that marked the beginning of everything we now call human. This is the dreamy story of human evolution, told not as a textbook recitation, but as a bedtime journey through deep time itself. Before we begin, I'd like to invite you to get truly comfortable. Adjust your pillow, pull your blanket up to just the right height, and let your body sink a little deeper into the mattress beneath you. If you'd like to support this channel and drift off to more journeys like this one, a gentle tap on the like button or subscribe would mean the world, but there's absolutely no pressure. You're here to rest, and that's all that matters. Tonight's story is long and winding, designed to carry you softly into sleep without any urgency or alarm. There are no tests, no deadlines, just the gentle unfolding of a story that belongs to all of us. Human evolution is often presented as a ladder, a straight line from simple to complex, but the truth is far more enchanting. It's a branching tree, a river delta with countless channels, some that dried up and others that flowed forward into us. It's a story written in bones and stones, in the shapes of ancient teeth and the curve of fossilized footprints preserved in volcanic ash. And as we explore this story together, you might find yourself drifting, and that's perfectly fine. Let the words wash over you like waves, and if you miss a detail here or there, it doesn't matter. This story has been unfolding for millions of years. It can wait while you rest. So take a deep breath in and let it out slowly. We're about to step back in time, but there's no rush at all. Let's begin. Somewhere between 6 and 7 million years ago, in the forests and woodlands of Africa, something remarkable was happening, though no one was there to witness it with understanding. The common ancestor we share with chimpanzees and bonobos was living its life, moving through the canopy and across the forest floor. And within that population, a divergence was beginning, so subtle at first that it would take millions of years to become apparent. This wasn't a sudden change, no dramatic moment where one creature became something entirely new overnight, but rather a slow drift, a gradual accumulation of differences that would eventually lead to two distinct lineages. One would become the ancestors of modern chimpanzees, and the other would embark on the long, winding journey toward us. Imagine those ancient forests, dappled with golden sunlight filtering through leaves, the air thick and warm, filled with calls and rustles, and somewhere in that green world, the first whispers of humanity were stirring without fanfare or announcement. Just life continuing as it always had, one generation flowing into the next. The earliest members of our lineage are called hominins, a term that encompasses all species more closely related to humans than to chimpanzees. And these earliest hominins were quite different from us in many ways, yet they carried within them the seeds of all we would become. One of the oldest known hominins is Sahelanthropus tichadensis, whose fossils date back approximately 7 million years, discovered in the scorching desert of Chad, a landscape vastly different now from what it was then. Sahelanthropus had a blend of features, some ape-like and some pointing toward later human traits, a mosaic of characteristics that reminds us evolution doesn't proceed in neat, tidy steps. Its skull suggests it may have walked upright, at least occasionally, though this is still debated gently among scientists who study these ancient whispers of bone and stone. To hold that possibility in your mind as you drift toward sleep, to imagine a creature moving through a world so distant from ours, is to touch something profound and humbling, a reminder that our story has very deep roots. Bipedalism, the ability to walk upright on two legs, is one of the defining features of our lineage, and it appeared surprisingly early, perhaps even before our ancestors left the forests entirely. Why this shift occurred remains one of the beautiful mysteries of human evolution, and scientists have proposed many ideas, each with its own poetry. Perhaps walking upright allowed early hominins to see over tall grasses, to spot predators or find food more easily across the changing landscapes of Africa. Perhaps it freed their hands to carry things, infants or tools or food, allowing for new behaviors that would ripple forward through time. Or maybe it was more efficient for covering long distances, as the climate shifted and forests gave way to more open woodlands and savannas. Whatever the reasons, and there may have been many acting together, this change was profound, reshaping not just how our ancestors moved but how they interacted with the world, setting in motion a cascade of adaptations that would eventually lead to us, lying here tonight, wondering about those ancient footsteps. Around 4 million years ago, a hominin called Australopithecus anamensis was walking the earth, and we know this not just from bones but from something even more evocative: footprints. Though the most famous footprints come from a slightly later species, the very fact that our ancestors left traces of their passage in soft mud that would harden and preserve is almost magical when you think about it. These early Australopithecines were still quite small, perhaps 3 to 4 feet tall, with brains not much larger than those of modern chimpanzees, yet they walked upright habitually, their feet and hips adapted to bipedal locomotion. They lived in a world of transition, where forests were fragmenting into mosaics of woodland, bushland, and grassland, and they adapted to these changes, their bodies slowly shifting in response to new pressures and opportunities. As you rest here tonight, consider how adaptation is not about perfection, but about fitting well enough into the world around you, about responding to what life offers. And perhaps there's something comforting in that, in the idea that survival has always been about flexibility and resilience rather than flawless execution. By about 3.2 million years ago, Australopithecus afarensis had emerged, and this species has become one of the most famous in the story of human evolution, largely because of a single, extraordinary fossil known as Lucy. Discovered in Ethiopia in 1974, Lucy's skeleton was about 40% complete, an astonishing find that gave scientists an unprecedented look at what these early hominins were like. She stood perhaps 3.5 feet tall, walked upright, but still had long arms and curved fingers that suggest she was comfortable in trees as well as on the ground. Lucy's world was one of diversity, of options, where climbing and walking both had their place, and there's something almost reassuring about that blend of capabilities. The idea that our ancestors didn't have to choose just one way of being but could inhabit multiple possibilities at once. Her discovery reminded the world that human evolution is written in tangible traces, in actual bones that once moved through actual days, under actual skies, and that connection across such vast time can be both humbling and strangely comforting as you let yourself drift deeper into rest. And then there are the footprints at Litali, preserved in volcanic ash about 3.6 million years ago, where three individuals, perhaps a small family group, walked across a landscape shortly after a volcanic eruption, their footprints captured in the soft ash that would harden like concrete and remain there, waiting for millions of years until humans would find them and marvel. These footprints are hauntingly familiar, with a big toe aligned with the others, an arch, a heel strike, all the hallmarks of bipedal walking remarkably similar to our own. Imagine that moment, those three individuals moving together across the ash, perhaps heading toward water or shelter, unaware that their simple act of walking would become one of the most evocative pieces of evidence in the entire story of human evolution. They were living their lives, facing whatever challenges and joys each day brought, and in doing so they left us a message across time. We were here, we walked, we continued. And tonight, as you rest, you are part of that same continuity, that same forward motion through time, one breath, one heartbeat, one moment after another, just like them. Around 2.8 million years ago, the first members of our own genus, Homo, appeared in the fossil record, marking what many consider a significant threshold in our story. Though of course the Australopithecines didn't vanish overnight, and for a time many different hominin species coexisted, a rich tapestry of related forms exploring different evolutionary paths. The earliest Homo species are still debated, and their relationships are complex. But what seems clear is that these hominins had slightly larger brains, more human-like body proportions with longer legs and shorter arms, and they were increasingly committed to life on the ground rather than in the trees. This shift toward a more terrestrial lifestyle may have been driven by continued climate change, as Africa's forests continued to shrink and open habitats expanded, offering new opportunities for those who could adapt. And adapt they did slowly, over countless generations, each small change building upon the last, until something recognizably more human-like was walking the earth, making tools, perhaps even beginning to communicate in new ways, though all of this is gently obscured by the mists of deep time. Stone tools mark another profound threshold in our story, and the earliest known stone tools date back about 3.3 million years, predating the genus Homo, and suggesting that even Australopithecines may have been crafting simple implements from stone. These earliest tools are crude by later standards, just stones struck against other stones to create sharp edges, but they represent something remarkable: the deliberate modification of the environment to serve a purpose, the understanding that a rock could become something more useful with the right application of force and intention. By about 2.6 million years ago, more sophisticated Alduin tools appeared, named after Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania where they were first identified. And these tools were used for butchering animals, processing plant materials, and perhaps even defending against predators. Imagine the first time one of our ancestors picked up a stone and saw not just a stone but a possibility, a potential tool waiting to be realized. And in that moment of recognition, something fundamentally human was born, a capacity for abstract thought and planning that would eventually carry us to the moon and beyond, though tonight it simply carries you gently toward sleep. Homo habilis, whose name means handy man, lived between approximately 2.4 and 1.4 million years ago, and was once thought to be the first tool maker, though we now know tools predate this species. Homo habilis had a brain size of about 600 cubic centimeters, significantly larger than Australopithecines, but still only about half the size of modern human brains. And this increase in brain size marks the beginning of a trend that would continue throughout our lineage. Larger brains require more energy, particularly in infancy and childhood, and this would eventually lead to significant changes in life history, diet, and social organization. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, and there's no need to rush through millions of years all at once. Homo habilis lived in East Africa during a time of significant climate variability, with wet and dry periods alternating, and this variability itself may have been a driving force in human evolution, favoring individuals who were flexible and innovative, who could adapt to changing conditions rather than being specialized for one particular environment. Flexibility, adaptability, the ability to find multiple solutions to the same problem. These are themes that run through our entire evolutionary story, and perhaps they're worth reflecting on as you let your mind wander and your body settle more deeply into rest. Around 1.9 million years ago, a new species called Homo erectus emerged, and this species represents a major leap in our story, one that would have profound implications for the future of humanity. Homo erectus had a brain size ranging from about 600 to 1,100 cubic centimeters, significantly larger than earlier species, and they had body proportions very similar to modern humans, with long legs built for walking and running efficiently across open landscapes. They were taller, ranging from about 5 to 6 feet, and they were the first hominins to have a nose that protruded in the way ours does, which may have helped warm and humidify air in drier, more open environments. But perhaps most significantly, Homo erectus was the first hominin to leave Africa, spreading across much of Asia and even reaching as far as what is now Indonesia, where fossils have been found on the island of Java. This dispersal out of Africa represents a watershed moment, the first time our lineage ventured beyond the continent where it was born, carrying with them tools, fire, and the capacity to adapt to entirely new environments, from tropical forests to temperate grasslands. And this pioneering spirit is part of our heritage, this willingness to explore beyond the familiar horizon. Fire was another threshold, though pinning down exactly when our ancestors first controlled fire is difficult because evidence of ancient fires can be hard to distinguish from natural wildfires. However, by about 1.5 million years ago, and certainly by 1 million years ago, there's good evidence that Homo erectus was using fire, perhaps controlling it and maintaining it even if they weren't yet creating it from scratch. Fire would have been transformative in countless ways. It provided warmth in colder climates, light during the night hours, protection from predators, and perhaps most importantly, it allowed for cooking. Cooking food makes it easier to chew and digest, unlocking more calories and nutrients, and this may have been a crucial factor in supporting larger brains, which are metabolically expensive organs. But beyond the practical benefits, fire would have changed the social dynamics of these early humans, creating a gathering place, a hearth around which people could sit together as darkness fell, sharing food and perhaps stories. And in those flickering circles of light against the vast darkness of the prehistoric night, something deeply human was being forged. Something about community and shared experience that echoes forward to this very moment, as you rest here in your own safe, warm place. The Acheulean tool industry emerged with Homo erectus and represents a significant advancement over earlier Alduin tools, characterized by large, symmetrical hand axes that were carefully shaped on both sides, requiring significant planning and skill to create. These hand axes were remarkably consistent across vast stretches of time and space, suggesting that they were part of a learned tradition passed down through generations, and this transmission of knowledge, this cultural continuity, is another hallmark of being human. To make an Acheulean hand axe required understanding the properties of stone, the ability to visualize the final form before it existed, and the fine motor control to execute the necessary strikes, and all of this points to cognitive abilities that were increasingly sophisticated. Some of these hand axes are almost too beautiful and symmetrical to have been purely utilitarian, leading some researchers to suggest they may have served social or even aesthetic purposes, perhaps as displays of skill or objects of value in social exchanges. The idea that our ancestors, over 1 million years ago, might have been creating objects that were not just functional but also beautiful is deeply moving. A reminder that the human capacity for art and symbolism has very ancient roots, and perhaps you can carry that thought with you into sleep. The idea that beauty and meaning have always been part of our story. By about 700,000 years ago, Homo heidelbergensis had appeared, a species that would become the common ancestor of both Neanderthals and modern humans, though the exact relationships and classifications of hominins during this period are still actively debated, with new fossils regularly prompting revisions to our understanding. Homo heidelbergensis had brain sizes approaching the modern human range, between 1,100 and 1,400 cubic centimeters, and they were robust and powerfully built, adapted to a variety of environments across Africa and Europe. They were sophisticated hunters who created complex tools and may have constructed simple shelters, and there's even evidence they may have cared for injured or elderly members of their group, as suggested by fossils showing individuals, who survived significant injuries or disabilities that would have required assistance from others. This evidence of care, of social bonds strong enough to support those who couldn't fully support themselves, is profoundly touching, a reminder that compassion and community are not recent inventions but deeply rooted aspects of what it means to be human, present in our lineage for hundreds of thousands of years. And as you rest tonight, you're held in that same ancient web of care and connection, safe and supported. The earliest evidence for symbolic behavior, for the use of objects to represent ideas or convey meaning beyond their immediate physical presence, begins to appear in the archaeological record around this time, though it's faint and open to interpretation. Ochre, a naturally occurring pigment, has been found at sites dating back hundreds of thousands of years, with some pieces showing signs of having been used or modified, perhaps for body decoration or marking objects. By about 300,000 years ago, there's evidence of pigment use in Africa, and by 100,000 years ago or so, we find what appear to be clearly intentional patterns scratched into ochre, simple geometric designs that may represent the earliest known human art. These marks are abstract, not depictions of recognizable objects but patterns, lines, crosshatches, and they suggest that someone, some individual living unimaginably long ago, had the cognitive capacity to create meaning through marks, to externalize thought in a way that could be shared or preserved. It's impossible to know what these patterns meant, if they were decorative or symbolic or both. But the fact that they exist at all is remarkable, a window into minds that were beginning to see the world not just as a collection of physical things, but as a realm of meaning and representation. Around 400,000 to 300,000 years ago, in Europe and Western Asia, the lineage that would become Neanderthals was diverging from the lineage that would become modern humans. And while these two groups would develop separately for hundreds of thousands of years, they would eventually meet again with profound consequences. Neanderthals, or Homo neanderthalensis, were magnificently adapted to the cold climates of Ice Age Europe, with stocky, muscular builds that conserved heat, large nasal cavities that warmed incoming air, and brains that were actually slightly larger on average than those of modern humans, though brain size alone doesn't determine intelligence or capability in any simple way. Neanderthals were skilled hunters who made sophisticated tools, wore clothing, created shelters, buried their dead, and may have even created art. And for a very long time they were portrayed as brutish and inferior. But modern research has revealed a far more nuanced picture of a highly successful human species that thrived for hundreds of thousands of years in challenging environments. They weren't failed humans. They were a different kind of human, and their story deserves to be told with respect and wonder rather than condescension. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerged in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago, though the exact timing and location are still being refined as new fossils are discovered and dating techniques improve. The oldest fossils that are clearly Homo sapiens come from sites in Morocco and Ethiopia, and they show a blend of features, some modern and some more archaic, reminding us once again that evolution doesn't happen suddenly, but through gradual change across populations over time. These early Homo sapiens had the same basic skeletal anatomy we have today, with high, rounded skulls, small faces tucked beneath the brain case, rather than projecting forward, prominent chins, and relatively gracile builds, though there was significant variation across different populations and regions. For most of our species' existence, we lived in Africa, adapting to a wide range of environments across that vast and diverse continent, from tropical forests to deserts to coasts, and this early period of our history is less well known than what came later. But it was foundational, the time when the genetic, cognitive, and cultural foundations of all modern human populations were established. As you drift now, let yourself imagine those ancient African landscapes, the savannas and rivers and forests where our direct ancestors lived, loved, raised children, faced challenges, and continued, generation after generation, carrying forward the spark that would become all of us. Language is perhaps the most distinctly human capacity, and while we can't know exactly when fully modern language emerged because language leaves no fossils, we can make inferences from anatomy, genetics, and material culture. The FOXP2 gene, which is involved in speech and language, shows evidence of recent selection in humans, and Neanderthals shared the human version of this gene, suggesting they may have had some capacity for complex vocal communication as well. Anatomically, the descended larynx and specific vocal tract proportions necessary for the full range of human speech sounds appear to have been present in Homo heidelbergensis and its descendants, including both Neanderthals and modern humans. But language is more than just the ability to make sounds. It's a cognitive capacity for recursive grammar, for talking about things not immediately present, for conveying abstract ideas and building shared mental models of the world. The explosion of symbolic material culture around 100,000 to 70,000 years ago in Africa, including beads, engraved patterns, and increasingly complex tools, suggests that by this time, modern humans likely had language much like ours, a tool for thinking as much as for communicating. And with that tool, the pace of cultural change would accelerate dramatically. Around 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, some populations of Homo sapiens began to leave Africa, spreading initially into the Middle East, and then, over tens of thousands of years, to every corner of the globe, eventually becoming the only surviving hominin species. Though this wasn't inevitable or predetermined, but rather the result of countless individual lives and decisions, of adaptability and perhaps good fortune. This dispersal out of Africa, sometimes called the Great Migration, would bring modern humans into contact with other hominin species, including Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, and Denisovans, another archaic human group known primarily from DNA and a few fossils found in Siberia. When these groups met, they didn't just coexist. They interbred, and most modern humans today carry a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genomes, roughly 1 to 2%, with some populations also carrying Denisovan DNA. This means that Neanderthals and Denisovans didn't entirely go extinct. They were absorbed into the expanding modern human population, and part of them lives on in us, a genetic echo of those ancient encounters. It's a reminder that the human story is not one of singular triumph, but of blending and borrowing, of connections across groups. And perhaps that's a comforting thought as you settle deeper into sleep. The idea that we carry within us traces of many lineages, many stories, all woven together. You're doing beautifully. There's no need to hold on to every word or remember every detail. This is simply a story unfolding, and you're allowed to drift in and out, catching pieces here and there, or simply letting the rhythm of the words carry you deeper into rest. Take a slow breath in through your nose and let it out gently through your mouth. Feel how your body has grown heavier against the mattress, how your muscles have begun to release the subtle tensions they were holding. This is exactly where you're meant to be. The story will continue, flowing like a river through deep time, and you can float along with it, or you can simply rest on the shore. Either way, you're safe and supported. Let your eyes remain closed, and let yourself sink a little deeper with each breath. The Peopling of the World by Modern Humans is an epic story that unfolded over tens of thousands of years, as small groups moved into new territories, adapted to radically different environments, and in doing so became the global species we are today. By about 45,000 years ago, modern humans had reached Australia, which required crossing significant stretches of open water, even when sea levels were lower during the Ice Age, suggesting they had developed boats or rafts, though direct evidence of these earliest watercraft has not survived. By about 40,000 years ago, modern humans had entered Europe, where they encountered Neanderthals who had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years, and these two groups coexisted for perhaps 5,000 to 10,000 years, before Neanderthals disappeared from the fossil record around 40,000 years ago. The reasons for Neanderthal extinction are complex and probably involved multiple factors: climate change, competition with modern humans for resources, lower population numbers, and possibly diseases introduced by newcomers. It's a sobering reminder that even highly successful species can vanish, and yet the partial genetic legacy means the story is more complicated than simple replacement. By about 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, modern humans had crossed into the Americas, likely via a land bridge called Beringia that connected Siberia to Alaska during periods of lowered sea level, though the exact timing and routes are still debated, with some evidence suggesting possibly earlier arrivals by coastal routes. Once in the Americas, humans spread rapidly, reaching the southern tip of South America within just a few thousand years, adapting along the way to environments ranging from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests to high-altitude mountains. This rapid dispersal across two entire continents is a testament to human flexibility and ingenuity, to the capacity to look at any environment, no matter how unfamiliar, and figure out how to thrive there. And with each new environment came new innovations, specialized tools for hunting specific prey, clothing adapted to local climates, social organizations that fit the resources available, and this constant innovation, this endless creativity in the face of new challenges, is one of the defining features of our species, something we carry with us still as we navigate the very different challenges of the modern world. The last major landmasses to be reached by humans were the remote islands of the Pacific, a colonization that required sophisticated navigation skills, ocean-going canoes, and the courage to sail into unknown waters toward islands that couldn't necessarily be seen from the point of departure. The Polynesians accomplished one of the most remarkable feats of human exploration, settling islands across an area spanning a third of the Earth's surface, from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island, carrying with them plants and animals, navigating by stars, wave patterns, and birds, holding in their memories vast mental maps of the ocean. The last islands to be settled, including New Zealand and the Hawaiian Islands, weren't reached until roughly 1,000 to 1,500 years ago, making this one of the most recent chapters in humanity's global dispersal. Tonight, as you rest, you are the descendant of explorers and pioneers, of people who looked at horizons and wondered what lay beyond, who built boats and set sail, who crossed deserts and mountains and ice sheets, who persisted through hardship and uncertainty. And that spirit of exploration and persistence is part of your inheritance, part of what it means to be human. The development of agriculture, which began independently in several regions around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, represents another profound transformation in human history, though whether it was entirely beneficial is a question historians and anthropologists still debate gently. Hunter-gatherer societies, which had been the norm for hundreds of thousands of years, were often quite healthy, with diverse diets, ample leisure time when resources were abundant, and relatively egalitarian social structures. Agriculture brought the ability to support larger populations, to store food surpluses, and to stay in one place, which eventually led to the development of cities, specialized occupations, writing, and all the trappings of what we call civilization. But it also brought harder labor, less dietary diversity, social hierarchies, and eventually warfare over land and resources. This transition wasn't a simple matter of progress. It was a trade-off, a different way of living with different benefits and costs, and it reminds us that human history isn't a straight line toward some inevitable pinnacle, but rather a series of adaptations to changing circumstances, each with its own consequences. As you let these thoughts drift through your mind, perhaps you can simply appreciate the complexity of it all, the way every change ripples forward in expected and unexpected ways. Agriculture emerged independently in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, where wheat and barley were domesticated. In China, where rice and millet were cultivated. In Mesoamerica, where maize, beans, and squash became staples. In the Andes, where potatoes and quinoa were developed. In Africa's Sahel region, where sorghum and millet were grown. And in several other centers, each developing their own suite of domesticated plants and animals suited to local conditions. This independent invention of agriculture in multiple places is fascinating, because it suggests that once human populations reached a certain density and environmental conditions were right, The transition to agriculture became almost inevitable, yet the specifics of what was grown and how varied enormously. Domestication itself is a form of evolution, of course, a process where humans selectively bred plants and animals for desired traits, and over generations these organisms changed significantly, often becoming dependent on human care and unable to survive in the wild. Maize, for example, is so modified from its wild ancestor that it can't reproduce without human intervention. And there's something profound about that mutual dependence, the way humans and their domesticates have become entangled with each other, shaping each other's evolution. The last 10,000 years of human history, sometimes called the Holocene epoch, or more recently the Anthropocene to reflect human impact on the planet, have been characterized by accelerating change. The rise and fall of civilizations, the development of writing and mathematics, the invention of technologies from the wheel to the printing press to the computer, the growth of cities, the emergence of global trade networks, and eventually the Industrial Revolution and the modern world we inhabit today. This period is infinitesimally short compared to the millions of years of human evolution that preceded it. Yet in this brief span, we've transformed the surface of the planet, altered atmospheric composition, driven countless species to extinction, and spread to nearly every environment on Earth and even briefly to the Moon. It's a dizzying pace of change, sometimes exhilarating and sometimes frightening, and it can feel overwhelming when you're trying to fall asleep. But here's a comforting thought. Despite all this change, despite living in a world our ancestors couldn't have imagined, we're still fundamentally the same species with the same basic needs for connection, meaning, safety, and rest. Your need for sleep tonight is the same need felt by humans 100,000 years ago, and in that continuity there's something grounding, something that connects you to all those who came before. Throughout human evolution, brain size has generally increased, particularly over the last 2 million years, though this isn't a simple story of bigger always being better. And in fact, average human brain size has actually decreased slightly over the last 20,000 years or so, which initially puzzled scientists. The human brain today averages about 1,350 cubic centimeters, though there's significant variation among individuals and populations, and this variation doesn't correlate with intelligence in any meaningful way. What matters more than size is organization, the density and arrangement of neural connections, the efficiency of processing, and these factors are much harder to measure from fossils. The expansion of the brain, particularly the neocortex where higher-order thinking occurs, required significant metabolic investment. The human brain uses about 20% of the body's energy despite being only about 2% of body weight, and this meant that to support larger brains, our ancestors needed reliable access to high-quality, calorie-dense foods, which may be why brain expansion is associated with increased meat eating, cooking, and the development of complex social structures that allowed for food sharing and collective provisioning. As you rest, your own brain is busy consolidating memories, clearing metabolic waste, and doing the essential maintenance that can only happen during sleep. So by sleeping well, You're taking care of this remarkable organ that is your inheritance from millions of years of evolution. Childhood in humans is unusually long compared to other primates, and this extended juvenile period is another hallmark of our species, one that has significant implications for learning, culture, and social organization. While chimpanzee infants grow up quickly and become independent by about 5 or 6 years of age, human children remain dependent for more than a decade, with full physical and cognitive maturity not reached until the late teens or early 20s. This prolonged childhood allows for an extended period of learning, of acquiring not just physical skills but cultural knowledge, language, social norms, and complex technical abilities that are too intricate to be learned quickly or through instinct alone. It also means that raising human children is extremely costly in terms of time and energy, which may be why humans show alloparenting, where individuals other than the biological parents help care for children, grandparents, older siblings, aunts and uncles, and other community members. This cooperative breeding strategy is relatively rare in mammals, but may have been crucial to the success of our species, allowing mothers to have more children by distributing the costs of childcare across the group. And it also meant that children grew up embedded in networks of relationships, learning from multiple teachers and caregivers, which enriched the transmission of cultural knowledge across generations. The grandmother hypothesis is a fascinating idea that attempts to explain why human females undergo menopause, something quite unusual among mammals, and it suggests that post-reproductive grandmothers played a crucial role in human evolution by helping to provision and care for their grandchildren, thereby increasing the survival of their genetic lineage without competing reproductively with their own daughters. By gathering food, tending to children, and passing on knowledge, grandmothers may have allowed their daughters to have more children and to space them more closely together, which would have increased the overall reproductive success of the family group. There's something deeply moving about this idea, that the wisdom and care of older women has been evolutionarily significant, that longevity beyond reproductive years isn't just a quirk of modern medicine but has deep adaptive roots. It's a reminder that value and contribution aren't limited to certain ages or life stages, that we all have roles to play in the web of generations. And perhaps as you drift toward sleep, you can think of all the care you've received and all the care you've given, how that giving and receiving is part of an ancient pattern woven through human existence. Social cooperation is arguably what makes humans most distinctive, more even than our large brains or our technological prowess, because those things are enabled and amplified by our ability to work together in flexible, large-scale groups. Humans can cooperate with unrelated individuals, with strangers, with people we'll never meet, based on shared beliefs, norms, and institutions. And this capacity for cooperation at scale is unprecedented in the animal kingdom. We build corporations, governments, religions, and social movements that coordinate the behavior of millions or even billions of people, all based on shared fictions, nations, money, laws, gods, that exist only because we collectively believe in them and act as if they're real. The anthropologist Yuval Noah Harari calls this capacity for believing in shared myths the key to human success. And while the term myths might sound dismissive, it's not meant to be. These shared narratives are incredibly powerful tools for creating cooperation and trust among large groups. Of course, this same capacity can lead to division when different groups believe in different narratives, but the underlying mechanism remains remarkable. Humans are storytelling creatures who live simultaneously in the physical world, and in worlds of meaning we've collectively constructed. And that's part of what makes us so adaptable and so creative. Language and culture mean that humans have a second inheritance system beyond genetics. We inherit not just genes from our parents, but also knowledge, skills, beliefs, and technologies from the broader community we're born into. And this cultural inheritance can change much more quickly than genetic inheritance. A genetic mutation might take thousands or tens of thousands of years to spread through a population. But a cultural innovation like a new tool design or farming technique can spread in a single generation through teaching and imitation. This means that human evolution over the last 10,000 years or so has been as much cultural as biological, with cultural changes driving genetic selection, like the evolution of lactose tolerance in populations that kept dairy animals, and genetic predispositions shaping cultural possibilities. We are, in a very real sense, products of both our genes and our cultures, nature and nurture so thoroughly intertwined that trying to separate them is almost meaningless. And this dual inheritance is ongoing. You yourself are the product of both the genes you inherited and the culture you were raised in, the language you speak, the knowledge you've acquired, the beliefs and values that shape how you see the world, all of it swirling together to make you uniquely you. Play is another universal human behavior, seen in all cultures and throughout human history. And while it might seem frivolous or merely recreational, play actually serves crucial developmental and social functions, allowing children and even adults to practice skills, explore possibilities, build relationships, and experience joy without immediate survival stakes. Young mammals across many species engage in play, of course, but human play is particularly elaborate and extended, encompassing not just physical roughhousing but symbolic play, storytelling, games with complex rules, music, dance, and art. Through play, children learn to navigate social hierarchies, to cooperate and compete, to regulate emotions, to take on different roles and perspectives, and to innovate and experiment in safe contexts. The anthropologist Johann Huizinga argued that play is actually foundational to culture, that many human institutions and practices from art to law to ritual originated in playful activities and retain that ludic quality. So when you take time to rest and dream, when you let your mind wander without purpose or goal, you're engaging in a very ancient and very human activity, one that has always been essential to who we are, not despite being seemingly unproductive, but precisely because it allows for exploration and regeneration beyond the immediate demands of survival. One of the most distinctive features of human anatomy, and one that sometimes causes considerable discomfort, is the way babies are born, with their large heads barely fitting through the mother's birth canal, making human childbirth unusually difficult and risky compared to most other mammals. This is the result of two conflicting evolutionary pressures: the enlargement of the brain, which favors larger heads, and bipedalism, which favors a narrower pelvis for efficient walking. The compromise reached by evolution is that human babies are born relatively early in their development, when their heads are still small enough to fit through the birth canal. But this means they're born remarkably helpless, unable to walk, see clearly, or care for themselves in any way. This early birth and prolonged helplessness reinforces the need for intensive parental care and social support, further driving the cooperative breeding strategies discussed earlier. And it also means that a significant amount of brain development happens after birth, during infancy and childhood, which makes that development more responsive to the environment and more shaped by learning and culture. So in a very real sense, human babies are born prematurely by design, an evolutionary trade-off that has profound consequences for how we raise children and organize societies. And perhaps tonight, as you rest, you can appreciate the remarkable journey you yourself made, from that helpless newborn to the complex person you are now. The human hand is another marvel of evolution, capable of both power grip and precision grip, able to wield a stone hammer and also thread a needle, to climb and to write. And this versatility is enabled by our opposable thumbs, the length ratios between our fingers, and the fine motor control provided by our nervous system. The hands of our early hominin ancestors were somewhat different, often with longer, more curved fingers suited to climbing. But over time, as bipedalism freed the hands from locomotion and tool use became increasingly important, selection favored hands capable of manipulating objects with great precision. The human hand has been called our most important tool, the one that allows us to make all other tools, and there's truth in that poetic statement. With our hands we've shaped the world, creating everything from stone axes to symphonies, from cave paintings to spacecraft. And the same hands that type on keyboards and swipe on screens are fundamentally the same ones that our ancestors used to chip flint and gather berries millions of years ago. Tonight, let your hands rest, perhaps one on top of the other on your chest or stomach, feeling the gentle rise and fall of your breath. These remarkable instruments of creation now simply being, resting, as they deserve to do. The human foot, too, is a specialized structure quite different from the feet of other apes, adapted specifically for efficient bipedal walking over long distances. Unlike the mobile, grasping feet of chimpanzees or gorillas, human feet have arches that act as springs, storing and releasing energy with each step, making walking remarkably efficient. The big toe is aligned with the other toes rather than diverging like a thumb, providing a stable platform for push-off, and the heel is enlarged and padded to absorb the impact of heel strike. These adaptations mean that humans are exceptional endurance walkers and runners, capable of covering vast distances day after day, which would have been invaluable for our hunter-gatherer ancestors who might travel many miles each day foraging for food, tracking game, or moving between seasonal camps. In fact, humans are among the best endurance runners in the animal kingdom, capable of outrunning almost any other mammal over long distances, especially in hot weather, because our ability to sweat and our hairless skin allow us to dissipate heat much more effectively than furry animals can. This capacity for persistence hunting, running prey to exhaustion over hours or even days, may have been an important strategy for our ancestors. And it's a reminder that human strength isn't always about power or speed, but often about persistence, about the ability to keep going, one step after another. And perhaps there's a lesson there for life in general, applicable even to the simple task of getting through a challenging day and making it here to rest. Humans are remarkably hairless compared to other primates, and while we actually have roughly the same number of hair follicles as chimpanzees, our body hair is much finer and shorter, a characteristic sometimes called naked ape status. The evolutionary reasons for this hair loss aren't entirely certain, but the most popular explanation relates to thermoregulation. As our ancestors adapted to life in hot, open environments, losing body hair and developing more sweat glands allowed for much more effective cooling through evaporation, preventing dangerous overheating during extended physical activity in the sun. This would have been particularly important for endurance hunting or long-distance travel in tropical savannas. Another hypothesis suggests that reduced body hair made it harder for external parasites like lice and ticks to thrive, improving overall health. Whatever the original reasons, hairlessness became a defining human feature, and we then developed clothing and fire to stay warm when needed, essentially replacing natural insulation with cultural adaptations. And there's something metaphorically resonant about that. The way humans so often replace biological solutions with technological or cultural ones. The way we've become a species that shapes our environment and creates our own niches, rather than just adapting to whatever nature provides. Though of course this capacity for environmental manipulation is now raising urgent questions about sustainability and our relationship with the planet. Human skin color varies significantly across populations, and this variation is primarily an adaptation to different levels of ultraviolet radiation at different latitudes, a relatively recent evolutionary development occurring within the last 100,000 years or so as humans spread across the globe. Dark skin, rich in melanin, protects against the harmful effects of intense UV radiation, preventing damage to DNA and the breakdown of folate, a crucial nutrient for fetal development. Light skin, with less melanin, allows for more efficient production of vitamin D in environments with less intense sunlight. And since vitamin D is essential for bone health and immune function, there was selection for lighter skin in northern latitudes where sunlight is less intense. Populations living at intermediate latitudes or in varied environments show intermediate skin tones, and some populations have darker skin despite living in northern regions, likely because their traditional diets provided adequate vitamin D from other sources like fish. The key point is that skin color is a relatively superficial adaptation to local environmental conditions, a response to sunlight, and the genetic differences underlying skin color variation are tiny, a handful of alleles among the tens of thousands of genes in the human genome. Beneath the skin, all humans are remarkably genetically similar, sharing more than 99.9% of our DNA, and the racial categories that societies create are cultural and social constructs rather than biological realities, though they have very real social consequences. As you rest tonight, you're part of one human family, one species, united by common ancestry and shared humanity. The evolution of human emotional expressions is fascinating because many of our facial expressions are universal, recognized across cultures around the world, suggesting they're innate rather than learned. Expressions for basic emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust are produced and understood similarly whether someone grows up in New York or the Amazon rainforest or Papua New Guinea, indicating these expressions have deep evolutionary roots, likely shared with our closest primate relatives. These universal expressions serve important communicative functions, allowing us to quickly read others' emotional states and intentions, which would have been crucial for social coordination and survival. A genuine smile, for example, involving both the mouth and the eyes, signals friendliness and trustworthiness, helping to establish social bonds, while expressions of fear or disgust can serve as warnings to others about potential dangers. Of course, cultures also have display rules about when and how it's appropriate to express emotions, and we can learn to mask or modify our expressions. But the underlying patterns are built into our biology, part of our evolved social toolkit. Tonight, as you rest, let your face relax completely, releasing any expression, any mask you've been wearing throughout the day, just letting the muscles soften. And perhaps you can feel how much tension we sometimes hold in our faces without even realizing it, and how good it feels to simply let it all go. You're moving through this story beautifully, and I hope you're feeling more relaxed with each passing moment. There's no need to analyze or remember everything you're hearing. Just let the words be like a gentle stream flowing past, sometimes catching your attention, sometimes just providing a soothing rhythm in the background. Take another slow, deep breath, filling your lungs completely, and then release it fully, letting any remaining tension drain away. Your body knows how to sleep, how to rest, how to restore itself. You don't have to do anything except allow it to happen. The story will continue, but you're free to drift wherever your mind wants to go, or simply to settle into the peaceful darkness behind your closed eyelids. Everything is exactly as it should be. The human eye is another remarkable product of evolution, capable of detecting an enormous range of light levels, distinguishing millions of colors, tracking fast movement, and focusing on objects from inches away to the distant horizon. Human color vision is based on 3 types of cone cells in the retina, each sensitive to different wavelengths, allowing us to distinguish reds, greens, and blues. And this trichromatic vision is shared with other old-world primates, and likely evolved to help identify ripe fruits against green foliage. Interestingly, most other mammals have only 2 types of cones and see fewer colors, while some birds and insects can see ultraviolet light that's invisible to us. A reminder that every species perceives the world differently based on its evolutionary history and ecological needs. The human eye also has a blind spot where the optic nerve attaches to the retina, but our brain fills in the missing information so seamlessly that we never notice it. A beautiful example of how perception is actively constructed by the brain rather than being a passive recording of reality. And speaking of eyes, if yours are still open, perhaps now is a good time to let them close fully, to give them permission to rest, to release them from the task of focusing and looking, and to sink into the soft darkness that's the natural state of eyes at rest. Human hearing spans a range from about 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz, though the upper range diminishes with age. And this range is well suited to the frequencies of human speech as well as environmental sounds that might indicate danger or opportunity. Our ears are also remarkably sensitive to the location of sounds, using tiny differences in timing and volume between the two ears to pinpoint where a sound is coming from, a capacity that would have been crucial for detecting predators or finding prey. Music is a universal human behavior, found in every culture, and while its evolutionary origins are debated, it clearly taps into deep emotional centers of the brain, capable of inducing chills, tears, joy, and sadness with just patterns of sound organized in time. Some researchers suggest music may have evolved as a bonding mechanism, a way of synchronizing emotions and actions across groups, while others emphasize its role in courtship and mate selection. But whatever its origins, music is one of the most moving human creations, a purely abstract art form that can convey meaning and emotion with extraordinary power. And perhaps tonight, the rhythm and cadence of these words is creating its own kind of music, a lullaby of scientific wonder, carrying you gently toward sleep. The sense of smell, while perhaps less emphasized in humans than in many other mammals, is still deeply connected to memory and emotion through the limbic system, which is why a particular scent can instantly transport you back to a childhood memory or evoke a strong feeling. This connection between smell and memory is more direct than for other senses, with olfactory signals going straight to the emotional and memory centers of the brain, without first passing through the thalamus, as visual and auditory information does. For our ancestors, smell would have been important for finding food, detecting predators or smoke from fire, recognizing kin, and possibly even for social communication through pheromones. Though the role of pheromones in humans is controversial and much less clear than in many other mammals. Taste and smell work together, with much of what we call flavor actually being smell, which is why food tastes bland when you have a stuffy nose. As you rest tonight, perhaps you can notice if there are any subtle scents in your environment, the smell of your pillow or blanket, maybe a lingering hint of lavender or fresh laundry, and let those gentle scents anchor you in the present moment, in this safe, comfortable place where you're allowing yourself to rest. The human digestive system is specialized for an omnivorous diet, able to process a wide variety of plant and animal foods, and this flexibility has been one of the keys to our success as a species, allowing us to inhabit nearly every environment on Earth by eating whatever is available. Compared to other apes, Humans have relatively small stomachs and intestines, which is consistent with eating higher quality, easier to digest foods, particularly after the advent of cooking, which predigests food by breaking down tough cell walls and proteins. Cooking is so important to human diet that some anthropologists argue we've become biologically dependent on it, that we couldn't survive long-term on a completely raw diet because we can't extract enough calories from uncooked foods to support our energy-expensive brains and bodies. The human gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria living in our intestines, is another crucial part of our digestive ecology, helping us break down complex carbohydrates, synthesize certain vitamins, and maintain immune function. These microbes are so important that some scientists consider them part of our extended genome, and the composition of your microbiome is influenced by your diet, environment, and even stress levels, creating another layer of interconnection between your body and the world around you. And perhaps as you rest, you can appreciate all the unseen processes happening within you, all the systems working quietly to keep you alive and well without any conscious effort on your part. Sleep itself is universal among animals with nervous systems, suggesting it serves absolutely essential functions that couldn't be sacrificed despite the vulnerability it creates. In humans, sleep plays crucial roles in memory consolidation, moving information from short-term to long-term storage, and integrating new learning with existing knowledge. During sleep, the brain's glymphatic system becomes more active, clearing away metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours, essentially flushing out toxins that might otherwise damage neurons. Sleep also supports immune function, emotional regulation, and metabolic health, and chronic sleep deprivation is associated with a host of health problems from obesity to cardiovascular disease to cognitive decline. Despite spending roughly a third of our lives asleep, sleep remained deeply mysterious until relatively recently, and there's still much we don't understand about exactly why we need it and what all the different stages accomplish. But what's clear is that sleep is not a luxury or a waste of time, but a biological necessity, as fundamental as eating or breathing. And by allowing yourself this time to rest, you're doing something essential for your health and well-being, honoring a need that has been woven into the fabric of life for hundreds of millions of years. Dreams are one of the most fascinating and enigmatic aspects of sleep, experiences that can feel intensely real while happening yet often evaporate quickly upon waking. Most dreams occur during REM sleep, characterized by rapid eye movements and brain activity similar to waking, though dreams can occur in other sleep stages as well. The content of dreams draws on memories, emotions, and experiences, often combining them in surreal or impossible ways, suggesting the dreaming brain is working in a different mode than the waking brain, making connections and associations more freely without the constraints of logic or reality testing. Various theories propose that dreams serve functions from memory processing to emotional regulation to threat simulation, or they might be simply a byproduct of neural activity during sleep, patterns without inherent meaning. Whatever their purpose or lack thereof, Dreams are a universal human experience, recorded in art and literature across cultures and throughout history. A reminder that consciousness itself is stranger and more multi-layered than we usually acknowledge. And perhaps tonight, as you drift into sleep, you'll dream, and those dreams will be uniquely yours, drawn from your experiences and your mind, continuing the ancient human tradition of nightly journeys into inner landscapes that are both familiar and strange. Human longevity has increased dramatically over the course of history, though it's important to distinguish between lifespan, which is the maximum age humans can reach, and life expectancy, which is the average age people actually reach in a given population. Lifespan hasn't changed much. There were individuals living into their 70s or even 80s even in ancient times, though they were relatively rare. What has changed is life expectancy, which has nearly doubled in many countries over the last century, primarily due to reductions in infant and childhood mortality from improved sanitation, nutrition, and medicine, along with reductions in deaths from infectious disease and childbirth. In hunter-gatherer societies, life expectancy at birth might have been only 30 to 40 years, but this low number is heavily influenced by high infant mortality. Those who survived childhood had a reasonable chance of living into their 50s or 60s. The fact that humans can live well beyond reproductive age, continuing to contribute to their families and communities as grandparents, teachers, and wisdom keepers, may have been selected for precisely because of those contributions, as discussed earlier with the grandmother hypothesis. Growing old is not a failure or a falling away from peak human form, but rather a completion of the human life cycle, each stage with its own value and role. And perhaps that's a comforting thought as we all navigate the inevitable changes that come with aging. Humans are among the very few species that can consciously choose to help strangers, individuals they'll never meet again, and who can't reciprocate. A behavior sometimes called altruism, though pure altruism is rare, and most helping behavior probably has some mix of motives. We see people donate to charities, volunteer time, even risk their lives to save others. And while some of this can be explained through reputational benefits or the good feelings helping generates, it's still remarkable compared to most species, where cooperation is typically limited to kin or reciprocal partners. This capacity for widespread cooperation and pro-social behavior may be linked to our ability to internalize norms and values, to care about what others think of us, and to feel empathy for those who are suffering. Human empathy has its limits, of course, and throughout history, we've also shown tremendous capacity for violence and cruelty, particularly toward those we define as outside our group. But the fact that we're capable of genuine compassion and care even for strangers is notable, and may be one of our most hopeful characteristics. Tonight, as you rest, you're part of a vast web of human connection, linked through culture and language and ultimately through shared ancestry to every other person on the planet. And while the world often emphasizes divisions and differences, those connections remain real and profound. The human capacity for self-awareness, for recognizing ourselves as distinct individuals with our own thoughts, feelings, and experiences, is another defining feature, though it's not entirely unique to humans. Some other great apes, dolphins, elephants, and even magpies show signs of self-recognition when tested with mirrors. But human self-awareness goes beyond simply recognizing one's own reflection. It includes the ability to think about our own thoughts, to remember our past selves and imagine our future selves, to see ourselves from others' perspectives, and to ponder our own existence and mortality. This metacognition, this ability to think about thinking, is essential for much of what we consider distinctly human: planning, reflecting, learning from experience, regulating emotions, and engaging in moral reasoning. It's also the source of much human anxiety and existential angst, the awareness that we're temporary, that we'll die, that we might fail or be judged. But it also enables meaning-making, the ability to craft narratives about our lives, to see ourselves as characters in ongoing stories, and to find or create purpose even in difficult circumstances. As you lie here tonight, you're aware of yourself resting, aware of seeking sleep, and that very awareness is a precious thing, part of what makes your experience rich and meaningful, even in this quiet moment of transition between waking and sleep. Language development in children follows a remarkably consistent pattern across cultures, suggesting it's guided by innate cognitive structures, sometimes called a language instinct or universal grammar, a controversial theory proposed by linguist Noam Chomsky. Children everywhere begin babbling around 6 months, produce their first words around 12 months, start combining words around 18 to 24 months, and by age 4 or 5, are producing complex sentences with sophisticated grammar, all with seemingly minimal explicit instruction. They make predictable types of errors, like over-regularizing rules, saying "goed" instead of "went," which shows they're not just mimicking but actually extracting rules from the language they hear around them. This rapid acquisition of language, one of the most complex cognitive tasks humans ever face, happens most easily during childhood. There seems to be a critical period when language learning is especially natural, and learning a first language after this period is much more difficult. The fact that all neurotypical children acquire language, regardless of culture or intelligence level, but no other species does even with extensive training, suggests language is deeply woven into human biology, a species-typical trait like walking upright. And it's one of the primary things that makes us human, that allows us to share complex thoughts and build cumulative culture, passing knowledge across generations in ways no other species can match. Human emotions are complex, involving physiological responses, subjective feelings, cognitive appraisals, and behavioral expressions, and they play crucial roles in decision-making, social bonding, and survival. For a long time, Western philosophy tended to see emotions as opposed to reason, as primitive impulses that needed to be controlled by rational thought. But modern neuroscience reveals a different picture. Emotions and cognition are deeply intertwined, and good decision-making actually requires emotional input. People with damage to brain regions involved in emotion often struggle with decisions, even simple ones, because they lack the gut feelings that normally guide us towards some options and away from others. Emotions like fear and disgust help us avoid dangers. Sadness can signal the need to slow down and conserve resources. Anger can mobilize us to overcome obstacles or defend against threats. Joy and love strengthen social bonds and motivate us to maintain relationships. Of course, emotions can also mislead us or overwhelm us, especially when they're triggered by modern contexts very different from the ancestral environments where they evolved. But rather than seeing emotions as flaws to overcome, it might be more helpful to understand them as information, signals from ancient systems trying to help us navigate life, and to work with them rather than against them. And tonight, perhaps you can simply allow yourself to feel whatever emotions are present without judgment, whether that's contentment or anxiety or sadness or peace, just letting them be there, acknowledging them gently, and trusting that they'll shift and change as all feelings do, like weather passing through. The human immune system is an evolutionary marvel, a complex defense network that can distinguish self from non-self, remember past infections, and generate specific responses to billions of potential pathogens it has never encountered before. Innate immunity provides immediate, general defenses like physical barriers, inflammatory responses, and cells that attack anything recognized as foreign, while adaptive immunity develops specific responses to particular pathogens, creating memory cells that allow for faster, stronger responses upon re-exposure, which is the principle behind vaccination. Throughout human evolution, infectious diseases have been a major source of mortality and a powerful selective force, leading to various adaptations like genes that provide resistance to specific diseases, though sometimes at a cost. The sickle cell trait, for example, provides malaria resistance, but can cause disease if inherited from both parents. The coevolution of humans and pathogens is ongoing, an evolutionary arms race where diseases evolve to exploit us, and we evolve defenses. And modern globalization has intensified this dynamic by allowing diseases to spread rapidly worldwide, while also facilitating rapid development and distribution of vaccines and treatments. Your immune system right now, as you rest, is quietly patrolling your body, cleaning up damaged cells, fighting off invaders, maintaining the integrity of your physical self. And sleep actually supports immune function, giving your body the resources it needs to maintain these defenses. So by sleeping well tonight, you're supporting one of your most essential systems. The evolution of human diet from our early hominin ancestors to the present day is a story of increasing flexibility and technological intervention. From foraging for wild foods, to controlling fire for cooking, to domesticating plants and animals, to modern industrial agriculture and food processing. Each of these transitions changed not just what humans ate, but also how we lived, our social structures, our health, and even our biology. Cooking, as mentioned earlier, was transformative, making foods more digestible and reducing the time and energy needed for chewing and digestion. And this may have enabled the evolution of larger brains and smaller guts. Agriculture allowed for food storage and larger, denser populations, but also made populations more vulnerable to famine if crops failed and led to less diverse diets. And skeletal evidence shows that early agricultural populations were often less healthy than their hunter-gatherer predecessors, with more dental problems, infectious diseases, and signs of nutritional stress. The modern diet in industrialized nations, rich in processed foods, refined sugars, and unhealthy fats, has created new health challenges like obesity, diabetes, and heart disease, sometimes called diseases of civilization, which are rare in populations eating more traditional diets. This mismatch between the foods we evolved eating over millions of years and the foods readily available in modern environments is a source of much ill health. A reminder that rapid cultural change can outpace biological adaptation, leaving us somewhat stranded between our evolutionary past and our technological present. Humans are the only species that engages in complex trade and economic exchange, systems where goods and services are produced, distributed, and consumed according to socially constructed rules and values, often mediated by symbolic representations of value like money. The origins of trade likely go back tens of thousands of years, with archaeological evidence of materials like obsidian, shells, and ochre found far from their sources, indicating they were transported or exchanged across long distances. Trade allows for specialization, where different individuals or groups focus on producing different goods, increasing overall efficiency, and allowing for the development of skills and technologies that wouldn't be possible if everyone had to be self-sufficient. It also creates interdependence, webs of connection where distant strangers become economically linked even if they never meet. And in principle, this interdependence can promote peace and cooperation, though it can also create exploitation and inequality when exchange isn't fair or voluntary. The modern global economy is the culmination of this trend, an incredibly complex system linking billions of people and affecting nearly every aspect of daily life. And while it has generated unprecedented wealth and technological progress, it has also raised urgent questions about sustainability, inequality, and the environmental costs of endless growth. These are weighty topics, perhaps too weighty for bedtime, but they are part of the human story, part of the world you're navigating, and sometimes just acknowledging complexity is enough. Allowing yourself to rest without having to solve everything tonight. Art is universal in human cultures, taking countless forms from cave paintings to sculpture to music to dance to literature to film. And while animals do create things and some animal products can be quite beautiful, human art is distinctive in its intentionality, its symbolic content, and its cultural embeddedness. The oldest known cave paintings, like those in Chauvet Cave in France or in Indonesia, date back more than 30,000 years, showing sophisticated representations of animals, human hands, and abstract patterns, created deep underground by flickering firelight. Images that still have the power to move us today. These ancient artists were like us, with the same capacity for symbolic thought, aesthetic appreciation, and the desire to create meaning and beauty. to leave a mark that would persist beyond their individual lives. Art serves many functions. It can tell stories, preserve cultural knowledge, express emotions, strengthen group identity, demonstrate skill, explore ideas, provoke thought, and simply provide pleasure and beauty in a world that can be harsh and difficult. The fact that humans spend time and resources creating things that have no immediate survival value speaks to how we're not purely utilitarian creatures, but meaning-making ones who need beauty, narrative, and expression as much as we need food and shelter. And perhaps tonight you can appreciate whatever forms of art have touched your life. The songs or stories or images that have moved you, that have made life richer and more bearable. Religion and spiritual belief are found in all human cultures, taking diverse forms but sharing certain common features. Beliefs in supernatural agents or forces, rituals and practices to interact with the sacred, moral codes often said to be divinely ordained, and communities of believers who share these beliefs and practices. The evolutionary origins of religion are debated, with some researchers arguing it was directly selected for because it promoted group cohesion and cooperation, while others suggest it's a byproduct of other cognitive adaptations like our tendency to detect agency in the world, to infer purposes and intentions, and to think about things we can't see or touch. Children naturally engage in magical thinking and easily accept ideas about invisible beings, suggesting our minds might be predisposed toward religious belief, though cultural context determines what specific beliefs develop. Religion has clearly played enormous roles in human history, inspiring great art and compassion, but also conflict and violence, providing comfort and meaning, but also sometimes promoting rigid thinking and resistance to change. Whatever your own relationship with religion or spirituality, whether you find deep meaning in it or none at all, it's part of the human story, an attempt to grapple with the big questions about why we're here, what happens after death, how we should live, and where meaning comes from, questions that have haunted and inspired humans for as long as we've been capable of asking them. Humans have an unusual relationship with mortality awareness. As far as we know, we're the only species that knows we will die, that can contemplate our own future non-existence, and this awareness has profound psychological and cultural consequences. The knowledge of death can generate anxiety and existential dread, but it can also motivate us to seek meaning, to create legacies, to invest in relationships and projects that will outlast us. Terror management theory in psychology suggests that much of human culture serves to buffer the anxiety of death awareness, providing symbolic immortality through achievements, offspring, or participation in enduring institutions and belief systems. The rituals surrounding death, from burial practices to mourning customs to beliefs about afterlives, are universal in human cultures and are among the oldest evidence we have for symbolic thought, with Neanderthals and early modern humans both showing evidence of intentional burial and possibly grave goods. These practices suggest that even our distant evolutionary cousins grappled with death and perhaps had some concept of an existence beyond the physical body. though we can never know for certain what they believed. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you're engaging in a kind of small death, a letting go of consciousness, a surrender to a state where you're not in control, and yet it's safe, temporary, restful, a reminder that not all dissolution is frightening, that letting go can be peaceful and necessary and good. The future of human evolution is uncertain and fascinating to contemplate, though evolution hasn't stopped just because we have culture and technology. We're still subject to evolutionary forces, though they now operate in contexts shaped by our own creations. Some evolutionary changes are ongoing. For example, genes related to lactose tolerance, skin color, and disease resistance have changed significantly in some populations within the last 10,000 years. Modern medicine, which allows individuals with genetic conditions to survive and reproduce when they might not have in the past, changes selective pressures, as do cultural factors like mate choice preferences and reproductive patterns. Some people speculate about future human evolution involving larger brains, though actually brain size has decreased slightly in recent millennia, or about physical changes from sedentary lifestyles, though evolution requires many generations, and it's unclear what modern environments will select for. More dramatic changes might come not from natural selection but from biotechnology, genetic engineering, brain-computer interfaces, or merging with artificial intelligence, possibilities that raise profound ethical questions about what it means to be human and whether we should deliberately alter our own biology. These are questions for philosophers and societies to grapple with, not for bedtime, but they're part of the continuing human story, a story that didn't end with the past but is still being written, and you're part of it, your life and choices part of the ongoing flow of human existence into an open and unknowable future. And perhaps there's something both humbling and empowering in that realization. Though for now, the only future you need to think about is the rest of this night, this sleep, this restoration. Letting the longer arc of human destiny wait while you simply rest. You've traveled through millions of years tonight, from the first stirrings of our lineage in ancient African forests to the complexities of modern human life, and if you've drifted in and out, that's perfectly fine. This story doesn't need your full attention. It's here to support your rest, not to demand anything from you. Take a moment now to scan through your body from head to toe, noticing where you're making contact with the bed, where you're supported and held. Let any remaining tension dissolve. Your breath is flowing naturally, your heart is beating steadily, all your systems are functioning without any effort on your part. You're safe, you're comfortable, and you're exactly where you need to be. The story will continue for a while longer, but there's no pressure to follow every word. Just let yourself be carried along, or let yourself sink deeper into sleep. Either way is perfect. Migration is woven throughout human history, with people constantly moving in search of resources, fleeing danger, or simply seeking better opportunities. And this restlessness, this willingness to leave the familiar in search of something better, may be part of what defines us as a species. From the original dispersal out of Africa to the peopling of the Pacific Islands to the mass migrations of the modern era, humans have always been on the move, and each migration has brought encounters between different groups, exchanges of genes and culture, conflict and cooperation. Genetic studies reveal that modern populations are the result of countless mixing events, with very few groups remaining isolated for long periods. And this genetic mixing has created the diversity we see today, while also ensuring that all humans remain fundamentally one species, interfered and genetically very similar despite superficial differences. Migration in the modern world continues, driven by economic inequality, political instability, climate change, and personal choice, and it remains contentious and challenging, raising questions about borders, identity, and belonging. But from an evolutionary perspective, it's deeply continuous with the rest of human history, just the latest chapter in a story of movement and mixing that has defined our species from the beginning. As you rest tonight, you are the descendant of migrants, of people who crossed mountains and oceans and deserts, and that same adaptive flexibility that carried them through now lives in you. The domestication of animals, beginning perhaps around 15,000 years ago with dogs, and continuing with sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, chickens, and many others, created partnerships between humans and other species that have shaped both parties profoundly. Dogs, descended from wolves, were the first domesticated animals, and likely began their association with humans as scavengers around campsites who were gradually tolerated, and then actively bred for useful traits like tameness, obedience, and specialized skills like herding or guarding. Over thousands of years of selective breeding, dogs became phenomenally diverse, from tiny chihuahuas to massive Great Danes, all still genetically wolves but behaviorally and morphologically transformed by their association with humans. Other domesticated animals show similar patterns of change. Smaller brains, more docile temperaments, physical changes like floppy ears and curly tails, changes that occur reliably when animals are bred for tameness, a suite of traits called domestication syndrome. These animals have become dependent on humans, but the relationship goes both ways. The development of agriculture and civilization would have been impossible without domesticated animals providing labor, transportation, clothing, and concentrated protein. And dogs in particular have become integrated into human social and emotional lives, often treated as family members, a relationship unique in its depth and mutual understanding. And perhaps you have a pet nearby as you rest, another species sharing your space, a reminder of these ancient interspecies partnerships. Humans have a unique relationship with narrative. We understand our lives and the world through stories, organizing experience into sequences with beginnings, middles, and ends, with characters and causation and meaning. Psychological research suggests that narrative thinking is fundamental to human cognition, that we automatically structure memory and experience as stories, and that our sense of self is essentially a story we tell about who we are, where we've been, and where we're going. This narrative capacity allows us to learn from others' experiences, to plan by imagining future scenarios, to maintain cultural traditions by passing down stories across generations, and to find meaning even in suffering by framing it as part of a larger arc. Stories can unite or divide, inspire or manipulate, comfort or frighten, and they're absolutely central to human culture in forms from oral traditions to religious texts to novels to films. The story you've been listening to tonight is one about where you came from, a narrative arc stretching back millions of years, and by locating yourself within that larger story, perhaps you can feel both how small and temporary your individual life is, and also how connected and meaningful, how you're part of something vast and ongoing, a brief but real manifestation of a process that's been unfolding across deep time. And that's a story worth resting in, worth letting soak into your awareness as you drift toward sleep. This knowledge that you belong to an ancient lineage, that you're part of something much bigger than yourself. Humans engage in teaching, the deliberate transmission of knowledge and skills from more experienced to less experienced individuals, far more than any other species, and this active pedagogy is one of the key ways culture accumulates over generations. While many animals learn from observing others, humans actively instruct, correct, and scaffold learning, breaking complex skills into teachable components and adjusting instruction based on the learner's progress. This investment in teaching makes sense given the long human childhood and the vast amount of cultural knowledge each generation must acquire. From language to tool use to social norms to specialized skills. Teaching creates lineages of knowledge transmission, where what you know comes not just from your own discoveries, but from generations of accumulated wisdom passed down through instruction. And this cultural inheritance is why humans can start where previous generations left off rather than reinventing everything from scratch. You yourself are the beneficiary of countless teachers, formal and informal, from parents to school teachers to anyone who showed you how to do something or explained how the world works. And perhaps you've been a teacher too in various ways. And this web of teaching and learning is part of what knits human communities together, part of how culture perpetuates itself and grows more complex over time. And tonight, this story has been a kind of teaching, a passing on of knowledge about human evolution, though presented not as formal instruction but as bedtime narrative, gentle and dreamy, asking nothing of you except to rest and perhaps to wonder. Human music and dance are universal, and they're often communal activities that synchronize people's movements and emotions, creating shared experiences that strengthen social bonds. The neuroscience of music shows it engages multiple brain systems simultaneously, processing rhythm, melody, harmony, emotional content, and when we dance or move to music, motor systems are engaged as well, creating a whole body, whole brain experience. Group music and dance, from tribal ceremonies to church choirs to modern concerts, create collective effervescence, moments where individual boundaries seem to dissolve and participants feel united in shared experience. And this capacity for synchrony and shared emotion may have been important in human evolution, helping coordinate large groups and creating powerful bonding experiences. Music also serves individual functions, regulating emotions, expressing feelings that are hard to put into words, providing comfort or energy or catharsis. Lullabies are universal across cultures, songs designed to soothe infants and children to sleep, and perhaps the rhythm and tone of these words tonight is serving a similar function, a kind of adult lullaby, using the ancient power of patterned sound to ease you toward rest. Let the words wash over you like a gentle melody, not demanding understanding or attention, but simply offering a soothing sonic environment in which to release the day and welcome sleep. The human capacity for cumulative culture, where innovations and knowledge build upon previous generations' achievements rather than being lost and rediscovered, is perhaps our most powerful adaptation, allowing for the development of technologies and knowledge systems far too complex for any individual to invent alone. A modern smartphone, for example, embodies thousands of years of accumulated knowledge in physics, materials science, engineering, and manufacturing, and no single person understands every aspect of its creation and function. This cumulative cultural evolution proceeds much faster than genetic evolution and has allowed humans to adapt to new environments and challenges with unprecedented speed, developing new tools and practices in generations rather than millennia. But it requires certain cognitive and social capacities, the ability to learn from others, to teach, to use language to transmit complex information, to maintain traditions and institutional knowledge, and to innovate by recombining existing ideas in new ways. Culture is not separate from biology but builds upon biological foundations, and the interaction between genetic and cultural evolution has shaped modern humans in complex ways, with culture creating selective pressures that shape biology, like the evolution of lactose tolerance, and biology enabling culture, like language capacity. You are a product of both, your genes and your culture shaping who you are in interwoven ways, and as you rest tonight, you're sustained by accumulated cultural knowledge from the mattress beneath you to the building sheltering you, to the very concept of bedtime and sleep hygiene. All cultural innovations that make your rest safer and more comfortable than your distant ancestors could have imagined. One of the remarkable things about human cognition is our capacity for metacognition, for thinking about our own thinking, monitoring our understanding, recognizing when we're confused or uncertain, and adjusting our strategies accordingly. This ability to reflect on our own mental processes allows for more effective learning, problem-solving, and decision-making, and it's part of what enables science and philosophy, systematic attempts to understand reality and our place in it through careful observation and reasoning. Metacognition develops through childhood and can be strengthened with practice, and it's closely related to mindfulness, the capacity to observe your own thoughts and feelings without being completely identified with or controlled by them. Right now, as you rest, you might notice thoughts drifting through your mind, perhaps wondering if you'll fall asleep soon or thinking about something from the day, and you can practice a gentle metacognitive awareness by noticing these thoughts without getting caught up in them, seeing them as events in consciousness rather than truths you must act on. And this very noticing, this light awareness, can help create space for sleep to arrive naturally in its own time, without force or urgency. Humans are intensely social creatures, with brains and psychologies shaped by millions of years of living in groups, and social rejection or isolation activates the same pain pathways in the brain as physical injury, suggesting that connection is not a luxury but a fundamental need. The size of human social groups, the number of people with whom we can maintain stable relationships, seems to have natural limits, with anthropologist Robin Dunbar suggesting that number is around 150, based on the relationship between primate brain size and social group size. Though we can of course know of and interact with many more people in modern contexts with technology and written records. Hunter-gatherer bands typically consisted of 25 to 50 people, with connections to a broader regional network of a few hundred, and much of human psychology seems calibrated to groups of roughly this size, which may be why modern institutions often feel impersonal, or why we form smaller subgroups within larger organizations. We're exquisitely sensitive to social cues, to facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, and we spend enormous amounts of cognitive energy thinking about social relationships. Who likes whom? What people think of us? How to navigate social hierarchies and maintain alliances. This social focus has enabled extraordinary cooperation, but also creates vulnerability to loneliness, anxiety about social status, and the pain of rejection or exclusion. And in modern societies with their anonymity and mobility, maintaining meaningful social connection requires conscious effort in ways it might not have for our ancestors living in stable, face-to-face communities. Laughter is a universal human behavior, appearing early in infancy and serving important social functions throughout life, primarily signaling playfulness, friendliness, and group membership. Humans laugh far more in social settings than when alone, and laughter is contagious, spreading through groups and creating shared positive emotion that strengthens bonds. Some researchers argue that laughter evolved as a signal of safety, a way of communicating that a situation is not dangerous, and that play rather than aggression is intended, which would have been valuable in managing the complex social dynamics of our ancestors. Laughter also releases endorphins, natural feel-good chemicals, and reduces stress hormones, providing physiological benefits alongside social ones. Humor, the cognitive component that often triggers laughter, involves perceiving incongruity or unexpected connections, and the kinds of things different cultures and individuals find funny vary enormously. But the basic capacity for humor and laughter is universal, a reminder that joy and playfulness are part of human nature, not frivolous additions but integral to who we are. And perhaps before you drift off completely tonight, you can recall something that made you laugh recently. Let yourself smile at the memory. Feel how even the thought of laughter can lighten your mood and relax your body, and carry that gentle good feeling with you into sleep. Crying is another universal human behavior, though humans are unusual among primates in shedding emotional tears, and the function of emotional crying remains somewhat mysterious. Tears produced in response to eye irritation make sense, washing away irritants, but tears produced by sadness, frustration, joy, or other strong emotions seem to serve communicative or emotional regulation functions that aren't fully understood. Crying signals distress, especially in infants, eliciting care from others, and this communication function may be part of why emotional tearing evolved. Crying also seems to have self-soothing effects, with many people feeling calmer after a good cry, possibly due to the release of stress hormones in tears or the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. Cultural attitudes toward crying vary widely, with some cultures encouraging emotional expression and others valuing stoicism. But the underlying physiology is universal, and suppressing emotions consistently can have psychological costs. If you feel the urge to cry sometimes, it's a natural human response, not a sign of weakness, and allowing yourself to feel and express emotions in appropriate contexts and ways is part of emotional health, part of being fully human. Tonight, whatever emotions you're carrying, whether they're close to the surface or buried deep, they're valid and they're yours, and you don't have to do anything with them right now, except acknowledge they exist and perhaps trust that sleep will bring some restoration and perspective, as it so often does. The human face has more expressive muscles than other primates, allowing for the subtle, complex expressions that convey our internal states and communicate with remarkable nuance. We can produce thousands of distinct facial expressions by combining different muscle movements, and we're remarkably good at reading these expressions in others, often unconsciously, picking up on micro-expressions that last only fractions of a second. This facial expressiveness likely co-evolved with our intensely social nature, providing a rich channel for communication that complements language, and infants are drawn to faces from birth, beginning their journey of learning to read and produce these expressions. The human face is also relatively flat compared to other apes, with less prognathism, meaning the face is tucked beneath the brain case rather than projecting forward, and we have prominent chins, a feature unique to Homo sapiens and whose function is debated, possibly related to speech or simply a byproduct of other facial changes. The whites of human eyes, the sclera, are larger and more visible than in other primates, and some researchers suggest this makes it easier to see where someone is looking, facilitating cooperation and communication through shared attention. Your face right now, as you rest, can be completely relaxed. No need to hold any particular expression, just letting all those delicate muscles release, letting your features soften, and perhaps noticing how good it feels to simply let your face be at rest, with no one watching, no need to communicate anything, just being. Resilience, the capacity to recover from difficulties and adapt to challenges, is another important human characteristic, variable across individuals but present to some degree in everyone, and it can be strengthened through experience and support. Humans have endured extraordinary hardships throughout history, from famines to wars to natural disasters to personal tragedies, and while such experiences often cause suffering and trauma, many people also show remarkable capacity to eventually process these experiences, find meaning in them, and continue with their lives. Resilience doesn't mean not feeling pain or not being affected by hardship. It means having the resources, internal and external, to cope and recover over time. Factors that support resilience include secure attachments and relationships, a sense of purpose or meaning, practical problem-solving skills, the ability to regulate emotions, and often a certain amount of good fortune in terms of when and how challenges arrive. You've almost certainly faced difficulties in your own life, moments of pain or loss or failure, and the fact that you're here tonight means you've survived those moments. You've continued, and there's a strength in that worth acknowledging, not to minimize ongoing struggles but to recognize your own resilience, your own capacity to keep going even when things are hard, and to trust that this capacity will continue to carry you forward through whatever comes. And for tonight, you can rest in the knowledge that you've made it through another day, and that tomorrow will take care of itself. And right now the only task is to sleep, to let your body and mind restore themselves, trusting in the ancient rhythms of rest and renewal. The human hand's capacity for fine motor control, mentioned earlier, is supported by a remarkably dense concentration of neurons in the motor cortex devoted to hand movements, particularly the thumb and fingers, and this neural real estate reflects how important hand use has been in human evolution. When you learn a new manual skill, whether playing an instrument, typing, or any craft, you're literally reshaping your brain, strengthening neural pathways and creating muscle memory. A beautiful example of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself throughout life in response to experience. This capacity for learning and change doesn't end in childhood but continues as long as we live, though it may slow somewhat with age, and engaging in new learning and skill development may help maintain cognitive health. The things you can do with your hands, from the mundane to the extraordinary, are the result of evolutionary adaptations going back millions of years, combined with your own individual learning history. And there's something awe-inspiring about that. How such a seemingly simple thing as picking up a cup or writing a sentence involves the coordination of muscles, nerves, brain regions, and evolutionary history, all working together seamlessly and mostly unconsciously, leaving your conscious mind free to focus on what you're doing rather than how you're doing it. The human capacity for imagination, for simulating scenarios and experiences that aren't currently happening, is another defining feature, related to our ability to plan for the future, learn from others' experiences, engage in pretend play, create art, and develop empathy by imagining what others might be feeling. This mental time travel, the ability to remember the past and imagine the future, is enabled by a brain network that includes the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, regions that are enlarged in humans compared to other primates. Imagination is a double-edged sword, though. It allows for creativity and foresight, but also for worry and rumination, for imagining future dangers that may never materialize or replaying past hurts. If your mind is active tonight, perhaps imagining various scenarios or replaying events from the day, you can gently acknowledge that this is your human imagination at work, the same capacity that allows for all human achievement but that sometimes runs in unhelpful directions when you're trying to rest. And you can gently redirect your attention back to the present moment, to the physical sensations of lying in bed, the sound of these words, your breath. Using the present as an anchor when imagination wants to pull you into past or future. And gradually, with patience and without struggle, the mind can settle, like a snow globe that's been shaken, gradually clearing as the flakes drift down and the water stills. Human technology has progressed from stone tools to space stations in a remarkably short time. And while technology is sometimes contrasted with nature, from an evolutionary perspective, technology is part of human nature, an extension of our biological capacities for tool use and innovation. Each technological advancement has changed how humans live, often in profound and unpredictable ways, and the current digital revolution is no exception, reshaping communication, work, entertainment, and social relationships in ways we're still trying to understand. Technology brings tremendous benefits, from medical advances that save lives to communications that connect distant loved ones to tools that reduce labor and expand capabilities. But it also brings challenges: pollution, nuclear weapons, social media's effects on mental health, the displacement of workers by automation, and existential risks from technologies like artificial intelligence. Humans have always shaped their environments, but the pace and scale of change are now so rapid that biological and even cultural evolution struggle to keep pace. And we're faced with having to make wise choices about technologies whose long-term consequences we can't fully foresee. Using brains and social instincts shaped for small group living in a world of global complexity. These are weighty concerns, far beyond what any individual can resolve, but they're part of the ongoing human story, the latest challenges in a long history of challenges faced and survived. And while the future is uncertain, humans have proven remarkably adaptable. And that same adaptability that carried our ancestors through ice ages and climate shifts may yet see us through the challenges of the modern world, though not without effort, wisdom, and cooperation. The concept of free will, whether we truly make choices, or whether our actions are determined by prior causes beyond our control, is a philosophical question that has occupied thinkers for millennia and remains unresolved. Neuroscience has complicated the picture by showing that unconscious brain processes often begin before we're consciously aware of deciding something, suggesting that our sense of consciously willing our actions may be partially illusory. A story the brain tells itself about decisions that were already underway. Yet we certainly experience ourselves as making choices, and perhaps what matters isn't whether we have libertarian free will in some absolute sense, but whether we have enough agency and flexibility to respond to circumstances in multiple ways, to reflect on our actions and adjust our behavior. And in that sense, humans clearly have meaningful degrees of freedom, even if not complete independence from causation. The question becomes more philosophical than practical. You experience making choices, you deliberate and decide, and those processes, even if they're the result of neural causes, are real and meaningful parts of your lived experience. Tonight, you've chosen to rest, to listen to this story, to care for yourself by seeking sleep. And that choice, whatever its ultimate metaphysical status, is a good one, an act of self-care that honors your need for restoration, and you can rest easier knowing you've done what you can to support your own well-being. Human consciousness itself remains one of the deepest mysteries, the so-called hard problem of how subjective experience arises from physical processes in the brain, how electrical and chemical signals become the felt sense of seeing red, tasting coffee, feeling sad, or being you. Science can correlate conscious experiences with brain activity, can identify which brain regions are necessary for consciousness, can study how consciousness changes in sleep, anesthesia, or various altered states, but describing the mechanism by which matter becomes experience remains elusive. Some philosophers argue this is a permanent mystery, that consciousness is fundamentally different from other natural phenomena and can't be fully explained in physical terms, while others believe it's simply a very hard problem that will eventually yield to scientific investigation. Consciousness appears to come in degrees, from full waking awareness to drowsy drifting to deep sleep to coma, and right now your consciousness may be shifting, becoming less focused and more diffuse, thoughts becoming dreamier, the boundary between self and environment softening, and this altered state is perfectly normal and safe. Just the natural transition into sleep, consciousness not disappearing but changing quality, and you can allow that change to happen. Welcoming the shift from the bright clarity of waking awareness to the softer, dimmer terrain of sleep, where different rules apply and where restoration happens in ways that waking consciousness can never quite achieve. Evolution has no goal or direction. It's not progress toward some ideal form, but simply change over time in response to selection pressures. And this means there's no pinnacle of evolution, no species that's more evolved than any other in an absolute sense. Every living thing today, from bacteria to redwood trees to blue whales to humans, is equally evolved in the sense that each has the same amount of evolutionary history behind it. Roughly 4 billion years of unbroken lineage stretching back to the origin of life. Different species are adapted to different niches, and what counts as success in evolutionary terms is simply surviving and reproducing, passing genes forward, and by that metric, bacteria are arguably far more successful than humans, being vastly more numerous, diverse, and resilient. Humans are remarkable in our own ways, with our particular suite of adaptations and capacities, but we're not the point or purpose of evolution, just one branch on an enormous branching tree of life. And there's something humbling and liberating about that. A reminder not to take ourselves too seriously, not to imagine we're separate from or above nature, but rather deeply embedded in it, subject to the same fundamental processes as all living things. And with that thought, perhaps you can feel your connection to the broader web of life, to the tree of evolution of which you're a tiny, temporary but genuine part, and let that connection be comforting, a reminder that you belong here, you're part of the great unfolding of life on Earth. And for tonight, your part in that unfolding is simply to rest, to sleep, to let life continue its work of restoration and renewal within you. You've journeyed so far through the story of human evolution, through millions of years and countless lives, through all the developments and adaptations that led eventually to you, lying here tonight, listening to these words. And perhaps you've drifted away from the story at times, letting your mind wander or simply sinking into the edges of sleep, and that's exactly what this is for. There's no requirement to follow every detail. Just let yourself float, supported by the sound of the words, by the softness of your bed, by the knowledge that you're safe and that sleep will come when it's ready. Breathe slowly, deeply, releasing any subtle tension you discover as you exhale. Let your awareness become gentle and unfocused. You're doing perfectly, exactly as you should be. Just a bit more of the story remains, like a gentle send-off into the night. The story of human evolution is still being written, not just in the biological sense of ongoing genetic change, but in the broader sense of culture, technology, and our collective choices about what kind of species we want to be. How we'll relate to each other and to the planet. What values will guide us forward? We face unprecedented challenges, from climate change to biodiversity loss, to technological disruption, to persistent inequality and conflict. But we also have unprecedented knowledge, tools, and potential for cooperation, if we can summon the wisdom to use them well. The same cognitive capacities that allowed our ancestors to survive ice ages and cross oceans, to domesticate plants and animals and build civilizations, are still present in us, perhaps sufficient to navigate the challenges ahead if we can overcome the short-term thinking, tribalism, and short-sightedness that also seem to be part of human nature. This isn't a problem you need to solve tonight, of course. These are challenges for societies and generations, not for individuals trying to sleep, but perhaps there's comfort in knowing that humans have always faced challenges, have always had to adapt and innovate, and while there's no guarantee of success, there's reason for hope, grounded in the same resilience and creativity that has carried our lineage through so many changes already. And for now, your contribution to humanity's future is to rest well, to restore yourself, to maintain your own well-being so you can bring your best self to whatever tomorrow asks of you. And that's enough. That's exactly what you should be doing. The story you've heard tonight, this narrative of human evolution from our earliest ancestors to the present day, is based on evidence painstakingly gathered by countless scientists across generations, pieced together from fossils and DNA, and stones and artifacts and logical inference. A collective effort to understand where we came from, and it's remarkable how much we've learned. Though much remains uncertain and new discoveries continue to revise our understanding. Science is not a fixed body of facts, but an ongoing process of inquiry, always provisional, always open to revision based on new evidence. And the story of human evolution is particularly dynamic, with new fossils and genetic analyses regularly adding details or changing interpretations. But the broad outline is well established, where primates, specifically African apes, evolved from earlier species through natural selection over millions of years, closely related to chimpanzees and bonobos, and we dispersed from Africa to inhabit the entire planet, becoming a species characterized by large brains, complex culture, language, and unprecedented capacity for both cooperation and environmental manipulation. This is not just abstract knowledge, but your story, the story of your lineage, and perhaps you can carry it with you. A sense of connection to deep time and to all the beings who came before you, whose lives made yours possible. an unbroken chain of survival and reproduction stretching back inconceivably far. And you're the current endpoint of that chain, the living present of that ancient lineage. And finally, as this story draws to a close, consider that evolution isn't just something that happened in the past. It's ongoing, you're part of it. Your life is part of the continuing flow of existence through time. The choices you make, the children you might have or influence, the contributions you make to culture and knowledge, the relationships you build, the care you extend to others, all of this ripples forward, becoming part of the environment in which future generations will grow and evolve. You matter, not because you're the pinnacle of anything or because your individual life will be remembered for millennia, but because you're part of the web, connected backward to ancestors and forward to descendants, literal or figurative, and your existence has meaning within that context, as part of something larger and ongoing. And right now, in this moment, the most meaningful thing you can do is exactly what you're doing. Resting, allowing your body and mind to restore themselves, honoring your human needs, participating in the ancient rhythm of waking and sleeping that has sustained life for eons. So let yourself sink fully into sleep now. Let go of any remaining thoughts or worries. Trust that the world will continue without your vigilance for these few hours. And give yourself over to rest, to dreams, to the darkness and silence and restoration that sleep brings. You've done enough for today. You are enough exactly as you are. Sleep well, knowing you're part of an ancient, beautiful, ongoing story, and that tomorrow you'll continue your small part in that vast unfolding. Good night. And so we've reached the end of our journey together through deep time, through millions of years of human evolution, from those first uncertain steps away from our last common ancestor with chimpanzees to the present moment, to you, resting here tonight, a product of that long, winding, improbable path. If you're still awake and listening, that's perfectly fine. Sometimes sleep comes quickly and sometimes it takes time, and there's no right or wrong way to do this. The story you've heard tonight is vast and complex, and you don't need to remember all of it, or perhaps any of it in specific detail. What matters more is perhaps the feeling it evokes, a sense of being part of something ancient and ongoing, of being connected to all of life through common ancestry, of being remarkably complex and also fundamentally similar to countless beings who have lived before you. Human evolution is not a story of inevitable progress or of humans being the universe's purpose, but rather a story of adaptation, of responsiveness to changing environments, of innovation and flexibility, of cooperation and culture, and of the accumulation of tiny changes across unimaginable stretches of time until eventually something quite new emerged, something capable of wondering about its own origins, of telling stories about where it came from, of reaching back across the vast gulf of time to connect with its own past. That capacity for wonder, for curiosity, for seeking understanding even when the answers are difficult and humbling, is part of what makes us human, and it's a beautiful thing, even if it sometimes keeps us awake at night thinking about big questions. But for tonight, the questions can rest along with you. You don't have to understand everything or figure anything out right now. Evolution took millions of years. Your thoughts and questions can wait until morning. What matters in this moment is that you're here, you're safe, you're comfortable, and you're giving yourself the gift of rest, which is one of the most fundamental biological needs, as ancient as sleep itself, shared by your distant ancestors and by countless species across the tree of life. Sleep is not a luxury or a waste of time but an essential process, and by prioritizing it, by creating this space for rest, you're honoring your body's needs and supporting your own health and well-being. I want to thank you for spending this time with me tonight, for trusting this story to carry you towards sleep, for being part of this small moment of connection across whatever distance separates us. If you've enjoyed this journey through human evolution, perhaps you'll return for other stories on other nights, other explorations of the natural world and the scientific understanding that helps us comprehend it. There are so many wonders to explore, from the depths of the ocean to the far reaches of space, from the workings of the tiniest cells to the grandest patterns of galaxies, and all of it is your inheritance as a curious human being. All of it is part of the world you inhabit. But for now, let yourself rest. Let your eyes remain closed. Let your body be heavy and still. Let your breathing be slow and natural. If thoughts arise, just notice them gently and let them pass like clouds drifting across the sky, not engaging with them or following them, but just letting them be there and then be gone. The night is here to hold you. The darkness is a friend, not a threat, and sleep will come in its own time, gently and naturally, like the tide rising or the sun setting, inevitable processes that don't require your effort or control. You are the product of billions of years of evolution, of stardust that became living matter, of simple organisms that became complex ones, of fish that crawled onto land, of mammals that climbed trees, of apes that walked upright, of ancestors who survived and thrived and passed their genes forward until eventually, impossibly, miraculously, here you are. You are a wonder, not because you're perfect or special in any absolute sense, but simply because you exist, because you're part of this extraordinary ongoing emergence of complexity and consciousness in a universe that might otherwise be just lifeless matter following physical laws. Your existence matters, your rest matters, your well-being matters, and I hope you sleep deeply and peacefully, and wake refreshed and ready to continue your small but meaningful part in the great human story that continues to unfold. Good night and sweet dreams.